More South Carolinians use power from electric cooperatives than from any other single power provider. They serve parts of all 46 counties. Yet, recent news reports still refer to them as little-known power providers, mainly because, as you all know, they don't serve in downtown areas of large cities. Well, they're not little known in South Carolina anymore. About 15 months ago, a local co-op annual meeting turned ugly. This caused a cascade of events that put electric co-ops in the news, drew widespread member criticism, got state legislators excited, and gave co-op critics a big target to aim for. Here is Lou Green to share that story.
All right, I'll give you one. That's the first time I've been introduced by video. That's good. I like that. I'm going to have that done everywhere I go. How y'all doing today? Good. Glad you stuck around for the last guy on the program. Here I am. What? Oh, that's video. You can go to the screen. That's fine. I'm hard pressed to keep up with what's going on. Yeah. Oh, I want to show you a picture. Let me show you a picture here. You can tell this is old, probably I'm guessing early 1940s. And if you look closely at the whole picture, you would see that it's outside of an old co-op office. The young woman on the right there is my mother. I didn't know until I was a grown man, truly, that she worked at the electric cooperative. I was impressed to learn that. Next to her is Viola Giles, and next to her is a young woman I've never known the name of, but that's the picture there. That's my mother. She died at 89 in 2007, and right now she'd be saying, I did not tell you you could put my picture up there in front of all those people. Didn't know that my mother worked at the local co-op. Viola there and Rufus Giles bought a half-acre of land from my father when he bought the farm that I grew up on in 1957, right at the corner of the highway and the dirt road where you went down to our house. They bought a half-acre of land, and Rufus later, he worked at the meat packing plant, but later he started growing quail in cages in the backyard. In fact, I was talking to the guy who lives there now, and he says some of the cages are still back there in the woods. This was back before growing quail was a commercial operation, you know, and it wasn't as big a deal back then, but I can remember as a kid walking back there being amazed at the little chicks in the cages. Viola was back there one day in the back of the yard, walking around in the yard. Right, if you live in the country, you know how this is, where the yard turns into woods. And she's right there on the edge and walking along, and she kicked up something hard, and she reached down and picked it up and brushed it off, and it turned out to be a lamp. And in brushing the lamp, rubbing the lamp, she released a genie. And I'm not making this up.
Oh, yeah.
And the genie, grateful for being released from the lamp, granted Viola 3 wishes. Well, she said, you know what? I'd love to be young again. And poof, in an instant, she was a young woman, and this time beautiful. She thought a moment, she said, well, the genie said, number 2. She said, well, if I'm going to be young and beautiful, I'd like to have lots of money. And poof, in an instant, she was a young, beautiful, and very wealthy young woman. The genie said, now, Viola, slow down a little bit. This is your last wish. So she stood there thinking. And as she stood there thinking, her old tomcat was weaving in against her legs. You know how they go back and forth in your legs if you're standing there sometimes? She looked down at her old tomcat. She said, you know what? I wish you'd turn my old cat into a handsome prince. And poof, before her stood a tall, dark, handsome, good-looking hunk of man, long, dark, wavy hair and full lips, and he leaned forward, and she could feel his breath on her lips, and he said, now, aren't you sorry you had me neutered?
Christina, I'm sorry you had to hear that. Explain that to her.
I'm tickled to be with you today. I want to tell you a story. Wow, it's a story. Don't recommend it for anybody, but after it's over, it winds up being a story. Like the video showed, this is who we are in South Carolina in blue. Got 2 or 3 IOUs, got Santee Cooper, which is a state-owned electric utility in South Carolina, serves along the coast in 3 counties, restricted by law to 3 counties. And and then SCE&G, who you'll hear about a little bit later, they were bought by Dominion Energy back first part of the year. Going to talk about Tri-County, which is just south of Columbia. Columbia is there in the middle of the state, conveniently located for a state capital. Santee Cooper and Duke Energy are the co-op's major power suppliers. Our G&T does not own power plants. We have long-term power purchase agreements, and in both cases, we are the largest customer of both Santee Cooper, the state-owned electric utility, and Duke Energy, of course, who you've heard of before. I was going to talk to you about a meeting gone wrong, an annual meeting gone wrong, and then I got to thinking about it. You know, it's not just that simple. There's more to it than that. Really, it's far bigger than just a single meeting. We ought to be talking about the importance of good governance. That's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. But I want to tell you a story that began about 15 months ago at Tri-County. Sorry for those of you Tri-County folks, raise your hand. Be proud. You're not from us, so you're okay. So I don't want to misuse your name. But it is Tri-County. 15 months ago in May, they were going to hold an annual meeting, and in South Carolina, folks, the members elect trustees, which I know you do. We call them trustees. Maybe you call them directors. And they also, the membership votes on bylaws. That's not the case in every state, I have discovered. It was a complete rewrite of the bylaws. The board had been working on it for some time. And so they were approved by the board. The board had to agree to put it before the membership. So this was not new to the board. And when they sent out the notice of the annual meeting, they listed several examples of what were in the bylaws. One, there was a committee of members to supervise and ensure the integrity of elections. Two, open procedures to allow any member to run for the board, more open procedures, and some of the strictest rules in the state for limiting trustees' compensation, save some money that way, and some ethical rules of conduct. So that's what the membership got and was planning to vote on there. On May 17th, I go to most of the annual meetings. When I got toward the annual meeting at the crossroads of two highways, there was traffic backed up in all directions, more than I had ever seen before, and I've been going for years to that. 3 members of the board resigned before the day was over. 2 earlier in the day, 1 when you found out the way the wind was blowing. In the line for voting, people were handing out these little 4x5 cards. Nothing on the back, and on the front it just said, vote no. Turns out as we found out, some of the people who were passing out these cards were, shall we say, associated with board members. Later, people in line found out they didn't hear the whole story from the people who were passing these out. But the lines and the voting went on, delayed the 7 o'clock meeting for a little while. When the voting was over, the bylaws had been defeated by 30 votes. Well, that was a shock. A few days later in the paper, the article said, South Carolina Utilities part-time board enriched itself while customers paid high power bills. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I want to point out there that it says that they were making, the board members, some of them, up to $52,000 a year. The chairman of the board made $80,000 in the year that they were looking at. They held over 50 meetings in 1 year, some of them 15 minutes long. You recognize there's a problem, Isaac. Tri-County's co-op's greed demands legislative action, and it'll get it. That's a letter to the editor. Well, we're all used to letters to the editor by now. We know how people get on there and rant and rave and carry on, and we don't pay much attention to them. You pay attention to them in South Carolina when the writer of the letter to the editor is a state representative who serves in that area, who says something's got to be done, something's wrong here. So they started passing around petitions. Did some figuring out what can they do about it. Well, they can petition to recall the board. The petition said the grounds for removal are exaggerated compensation and mismanagement of cooperative per diem for trustees. 13,600 members. They needed 10% of the membership to call a special election. They got 1,600 members when they stopped counting. A couple of months later, after the annual meeting, by now people are getting aggravated and been talking to the reporter and talking into the community and troubled by what they had learned about. At the monthly meeting of the Board of Trustees, 100 folks showed up. So many people they had to put them in the community room. And they sat there waiting on the board to come out because they had tables in front for the board to come out. But the board didn't come out. Now, I realize that that's a little shaky and goes by kind of fast, so I took a screenshot of that brief video because I didn't want you to miss looking up the aisle to the table at the front and the empty chairs. That's where the board's supposed to be sitting. But did I mention the board won't come out? After the crowd stood and chanted and stayed and didn't look like they were going home, the board finally did come out and they chanted again, "Just resign," asked them to just give up and go home and let us go on, and the board refused to resign. So a couple of days later in the paper, "It's time you catch hell," they were quoted as saying, because the board would not resign. Well, now I told you they've got signatures gathered, 1,300 or 1,600 signatures, so now they can call a special meeting to decide what to do with the board because that was the intent. So they set it for August 18th. By now everybody's lawyered up. You see, because there's lots going on. One, the bylaws had a special lawyer who they had helped write the bylaws, Aaron Christensen. He's done a lot of work with co-op bylaws, and he had worked with the board and the manager to develop the new bylaws. They got a couple of plaintiffs' lawyers because now there are class action wannabe lawsuits that have been brought. Of course, since the co-op and the board have been sued, the board and the co-op entities, as entities, have lawyers, and then there's the co-op's counsel. So, oh dear. Well, the chairman of the board of the statewide association was getting concerned about now with all the public observations about this and what was going on, and so Mr. Reeves formed a governance task force. It was made up of 19 of the 20 board chairmen, their attorneys, and the CEO. Of course, Tri-County didn't participate. They had 5 meetings in less than 6 weeks. Now, think about this. These were substantive meetings where they really talked seriously and ground on these issues and the promise from the legislator that he was going to file some legislation. So that getting this many people together, and they all showed for 5 long meetings in just 6 weeks, was a to-do. It shows you how important it was to them. They developed feedback for Representative Ott's concerns. Even the representative came. He sat down in front of the crowd, big crowd of people, and stayed for an hour and a half talking to them about what he saw as needs for legislative fixes for all the co-ops, not just this one. You see a problem there? This one creates a problem. Now we're going to fix them all. Note to self. There. Think about that. Here's a quote from Representative Ott a few days later. "Events at Tri-County and the nuclear issue have combined to create an atmosphere that calls for attention to electric cooperative governance." Now, if you're paying attention and not ready to go home quite yet, you notice I introduced a new topic there. What do you mean, the nuclear issue? Well, if you've been following what goes on in South Carolina, you may have heard about this. Here's the way I know y'all are all utility experts, but here's the way we build nuclear plants in South Carolina. Y'all may take a different approach. We worked for many, many years building on it, spend $9 billion. We have our main contractor go bankrupt, and we got $9 billion in it, and we decide to cut our losses and quit. And so when we do that, we got a hole in the ground that looks a lot like that on 2 nuclear units. Now, why would electric cooperatives care? I just told you we don't own electric generation. Well, here's why we care. 45%, these nuclear units are owned by Santee Cooper, the state-owned electric utility, and SCE&G, South Carolina Electric and Gas, now owned by Dominion Energy. They're partners in building this. 45% owned by Santee Cooper. The co-ops buy a bunch. We're their largest customer of Santee Cooper. And because we've got cost-based rates, as you might imagine, 70% of their capital costs we pay. A brief math exercise. 45% times 70% times 9 billion, $2.8 billion that we're on the horn for. If that doesn't impress you, by the time you get that paid off with interest and other fees, it's $6.5 billion that the co-ops are responsible for. You might have imagined that this has caught the attention of the co-ops. This is a real concern, and it's a hole in the ground, and they're not going to finish it. And our people are wondering why they should be paying billions of dollars and never going to get any power from it. This is a problem. It should have won the award for understatement. Governance issues have arisen at an inconvenient time. Point number 2 to you. If you are expecting, as a safety fallback, that if we have a big issue at hand, we'll handle that issue and then we'll get back to business. Maybe you're not like my mama, who assumed that bad news came in threes. Anybody heard of that? We're still waiting on number 3, but 2's enough. We had governance issues and we had $9 billion worth of nuclear plant hole in the ground. So don't count on having your things under control, just handling one big issue at a time. That's lesson number 2. All right, let's go back to the governance task force. What we discovered, and I'm not kidding about this, is that whether you're an individual or a group, you have something big like this happen, you go through the 7 stages of grief. At first, and I saw it happen in this governance task force as they were meeting and grinding on this. Just shocked. Can't believe this is happening to us. In fact, it ought not to be happening to us. In fact, it's not happening to us because we didn't do anything wrong. By the way, I'm aggravated about it. We ought to get somebody and put them in jail for this. Well, let's talk about it. Maybe we can work out something with the legislature. And, you know, this is real sad. Well, let's give it a test and see what happens. All right, we'll do something. Now, you watch a group of people go through that, you realize it's really serious and it's really hard. Along the way, reporters, legislators, and everybody else, as I've alluded to, are beginning to want to know, well, is it just Tri-County? Might it be those others? They're all alike, aren't they? A reporter wanted to submit some questions to all the co-ops. We got a copy of the questions. I got a handout that they can make available to you of all the questions. I recommend you take the time at a board meeting and sit down and answer all those questions honestly, as if you were going to be reported on, and see how you feel. That's a good exercise. Eye-opening. So the statewide worked with a reporter. He sent us a copy of the questions. Now you might be wondering, well, my gosh, Lou, why would you do that? Why would you work with a reporter on that and make his questions better? And the answer is because the questions weren't well formed. No offense to him, they don't know our business. We're in a screwy business. It's hard for us to understand, much less anybody else. So aren't we better off if we get the questions well formed, and then we also work with our member cooperatives to answer the commonly questions with common answers, so that we wouldn't be giving him a bunch of different answers. That was all right. And when it was all over, I was going to tell you, asking about per diem and health insurance and how long it's been since you had competition in a board election, how long it's been since a new board member was some pretty tough questions. In the Sunday paper, where he's got lots of room, in the biggest paper in the state, top headline in the paper, South Carolina co-ops known for high pay, expensive perks. He had a long article. A few days later, another article. The board got bonuses, high pay, pricey dinners, the records show. Now I'm going to show you this. Again, we're strange in South Carolina. James Pettigrew, a South Carolinian, once said that South Carolina is too small to be a republic and too large to be an insane asylum. That was in the 1800s. Ain't much change. So here, when things are bad, when your lawyer is quoted, your board's lawyer is quoted in the paper saying, you got people who are relatively uneducated, they're country people. Now wait a minute. It could be different here. In South Carolina, I'll admit to you, when we hear that about ourselves, we don't think that's a compliment. Here's another one out of the trustee claimed to have worked for per diem on February 29th, the date didn't occur, February 30th, 31, April 31, September 31, November 31, dates that do not exist. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are going to be a crook, at least get your dates right. You know? I've seen the papers you signed. August 16th, regular board meeting day again. 60 members show up this time. The board doesn't even show, so the members get in front of the microphone and they talk to the lawyers and the CEO and the folks who are sitting up front and tell them what they think about the situation.
And a question that I had for the board today was, how could you in good faith enrich yourselves to the detriment of us, the members who you work for, by paying yourself the way you have? The meeting this coming Saturday, the 18th, was called by the members who are the owners of the co-op. We, the people of Lower Richland, or should I say what we have been called in the paper, those country and uneducated people. We have the power to do what we're going to do by calling the meeting and by voting you out on Saturday.
It is such a pleasure to be here today and to see that the board members are not. It is awesome.
As a corporate body, you have not only broken trust, but tarnished the name of our co-op. I implore you, the board, to finally do the only noble act remaining to honorable men and women: resign. I think all here appreciate the work that Tri-County employees put forth for us. So I'm just wondering if everybody here would join me in a round of applause.
I don't think this is necessarily unique just to Tri-County. You know, this may be a black eye and we may be front and center on what's happening right now, but I think what this has shown is there's some problems systematically across the board that we need to address. So whenever there's a problem, whenever there's issues, I also think that brings opportunities to try to do things better. And one thing I know for sure is that you cannot lead when the trust has been broken. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for everybody to have their say, but I also just want to remind everyone that we are country folks, as someone recently alluded to us as, but we are not uneducated.
No, that didn't bother him. Okay, so that's Thursday. On Friday, the 17th, word begins, this is the day before the special call meeting on Saturday. Word begins to spread on social media, wondering, is the board having a special meeting today at 2? That's what we've heard. They're going to try to fire the CEO. They're going to try to stop the meeting on Saturday. Lesson number 3, ladies and gentlemen, just because, how many people are on Facebook here? Raise your hand proudly. How many people are not on Facebook? Raise your hand proudly. Yes, indeed. Just because you're not on Facebook doesn't mean other people are not on Facebook or other social media. That's my point to you. Here's what your members have to deal with. They've got instant communication to lots of people and all their friends. Don't discount social media just because you don't participate. There's a potload of people out there doing it, proved right here. The word gets around, an unannounced meeting is taking place. So the members begin to gather in the community room again. Now in the community room up front is this door, and the door opens and goes down the hall to the boardroom. I call this the door through which the board will not come. Because if the board had come through this door and opened it up, this is what they would have seen. I was there, counted 225 people at last count. It was a crowd. So they all talked for a while, and everybody wanted them to come out, and they wouldn't come out. They were back in the boardroom. Well, they wanted to all go back to the boardroom. Well, there's not room to go back to the boardroom. So they finally decided to pick a few consumers, members, and the media, and a few other people, and go back to the boardroom to represent the big crowd. Now look what's happening. You got your newspaper reporter and your TV reporters and the cameras and the people with their own cell phones taking pictures headed back to the boardroom. See the guy, the little tiny head of white hair up front? That's the county sheriff. You see, the county sheriff is standing there holding a restraining order because when the rumor started on social media, they found out about it, and the lawyers worked really hard in a matter of 2 or 3 hours, got a restraining order drafted, got on the horn to find a judge somewhere. Turns out the judge that they knew was in Columbia at a continuing education or some kind of meeting. He was on his way back home down to the area, having a hard time finding him, having a hard time getting him to answer the phone, got to get the piece of paper printed out to get to him, to get it signed, to get it back. It was a mad dash, got back 10 minutes before the meeting happened. So it was a race that morning to get that, and call the sheriff. Sheriff, we got a restraining order, I want you to serve on the board. Would you be willing to serve it? I'd be happy to. He looks like he might sound like that, doesn't he? Yeah, he had different words he used that he would be willing to do that, but there he was. So they go back to the boardroom to serve the restraining order. Whoops, sorry.
Knock, knock. Hey. How's everybody? All right. Yeah. Restraining order.
Yes.
I've been told to serve on the board members. How many board members do we have?
I'm good.
Hey, boss. How you doing?
We have a room full of people who are your members.
This is
who
a
are
state
waiting
representative.
for you to come out and give them some direction as board members. And I know your attorneys are here representing you, but as board members, they deserve to hear from you. They were the ones initially who put you on to actually represent them. So they're sitting out there. They were there yesterday. There are even more of them today. Are you just going to leave without giving them any consideration and speaking with them?
Yes.
This
That's the
community's
lawyer.
been through a lot. The employees, the customers, everybody's been through enough. And those folks out there, they have rights too. They showed up yesterday when y'all called a board meeting. They showed up today when you called a board meeting. They have exercised their rights under the bylaws to call a meeting tomorrow. That's on board. That's going to play out. All I'm asking y'all is to allow them, as customers and owners of this co-op, to have their say.
If you don't walk in that room, you have solidified the character that you've showed that you truthfully have over the past few months or past years. You are solidifying your public image and your character of no care for the members of this co-op. Simple as that. If you do not walk in that room and give those people a chance to ask you and see your faces for one last time.
It's beyond pale of what's happened. In comparison with the rates, you guys were charged with looking over this whole thing. If you can't direct and manage the process with some business intellect, it's time to go. You failed us. We appreciate you trying, but it's time to go.
You can leave my mic on during the videos. Now I want to show you this. While this is going on in the boardroom, we got entertainment television going on. Somebody who works for me said, who wasn't there, was watching streaming on live. He said, "Lou, seriously, it was better than any reality show I've ever seen." So here's what I want to show you here. Here are the people sitting in the community room watching a screen because they put it on the screen, a live stream of a television station that's in the boardroom. Going out all over the internet, they're watching. Watch this other thing. See that lady with the phone there holding it up? See that lady? That's the general manager right there. See that lady holding the phone up, talking? They were doing that in the community room as well, and I wondered, what in the world are they doing? And it took me a minute to figure out. They're live streaming, FaceTiming, whatever you call it, you know, to all their friends. All of this is going, everybody in the community room was walking around like this. Folks, we don't have control. If we ever had control, we don't have control anymore. Get your house in order before you're faced with something like this, if it's not in order. One reporter the reporter who's been reporting most on this, tweeted a board, he'd never seen a board not show up for its monthly meeting. A board call a secret meeting for the next day and then not show up for that either, and customers look a company's leaders in the eyes and call them cowards. Next day, in the paper, day of the special meeting, board foiled in its attempt to fire the CEO. So on the same day they're holding the special meeting that they have called now with those 1,600 signatures, two things on the ballot: shall the remaining members of the board be removed from office, and shall the bylaws, same bylaws you voted on previously, be approved? They didn't have a problem gathering a crowd. Didn't give away any prizes. Everybody showed, seemed to be real interested. When the votes were counted, the bylaws passed 1,400 votes, and the bylaws passed by 1,300 votes on the bottom, and all the board members were removed. 30 family members were there.
30 family.
A few days later, a new revelation. No, but was it Bob Barker or Johnny said, there's more. Workers are saying, sworn affidavits, that utility directors got free power lines and landscaping. What specifically are you talking about, Lou, you might ask? Well, one, a sworn affidavit said the trustee turned out to be the board chairman, got paid just $2,600 for roughly a $300,000 project in 2007. Many of you will understand when I tell you it was a three-phase line going to an irrigation pump. The next day in the paper, a lawmaker has requested a federal investigation. Now, they're talking about draft legislation. They want more transparency. Here's interesting. He took a different tack, interesting tack. He wasn't interested in prescribing lots of rules for co-ops to follow. His main thing was say, I'm not going to tell you how much to pay your trustees. I just want you to disclose it. Make it easy for the members to find. Longer voting periods, make the board minutes accessible, make the meetings accessible to members. Meanwhile, the legislature's put together a House and Senate committee to investigate initially what was going on with Sandy Cooper and the nuclear problem. Notice what I said about issues coming together? They were put together to form the but before we can talk about the nuclear problem and listen to the co-ops, we want to know, what is this going on with you co-ops here? So our folks were in front of the legislature. That's our lobbyist on the left and our CEO on the right, having to testify about what co-ops are and structure and why you structure the way you do, and do you do what you ought to do. After the removal of the board, they got a special meeting that's scheduled for November so they can elect a whole new board. Remember, right now we don't have any board at all. So on board election day, on November 17th, they're going to elect 9 new members. They had 48 candidates, and think that there were more candidates than that some of them didn't qualify. And all 48 of these candidates had to gather 50 signatures on a petition, because didn't have a nominating committee. It's the only way they can come up with candidates. So everybody had to get 50 signatures to run, and that's the new board. Here's the interesting thing. Maybe if you've been reading closely, you've heard of some not so positive results from board ousters and new folks coming in, and they're still problematic, you know. This is a good crowd. Diverse, male, female, young, old, black, white. There's a retired college football coach. There's an engineer. There's a retired educator. There's the current captain of the fire department. A nice mix of folks. And they set about doing real good work to begin with. They reduced expenses by 30%, moved the board meeting date so the members can come and participate if they want to. They approved the development of a new logo, built a new website. Before any legislation was passed, they decided we're going to post information that is members, the owners' information, so they can get to it. They joined Touchstone Energy. They added member-focused programs like a loan program where you can retrofit your energy efficiency of your home. Well, the legislature did convene on January 8th, and we were working with the legislature to craft the best legislation we could. We were not saying no. That's about the fourth lesson there. We realize this train is moving. We better get in there and get with it and show that we are willing to participate. That's the two big issues there. We're trying to be proactive, trying to show we can handle our own issues so we can get this done and get back to the nuclear issue. Our lobbyist said he'd love for this legislation to be in and out and done in the first 2 weeks of the legislative session. It didn't happen quite like that, but that's what we wanted to happen. February 17th, the legislation was finally filed. Representative Ott quoted in the paper, look at the progress we've made. This could have been different. But the sponsor of the legislation saying overwhelmingly impressed with the co-op's cooperation. Another sponsor, excellent sign that the co-ops are on board here. So by May 9th, the legislation has passed, giving, as he called it, these scantily regulated co-ops oversight for the first time, passed the Senate unanimously. And 1 year to the day of the infamous annual meeting.
Let's make it law.
Yes, sir.
The electric co-ops, of course, are vitally important to the past and future of South Carolina. We've got to have plenty of electric power if we're going to continue to thrive. And so we're very proud of our people, proud of our state, and proud of this legislation. It took some doing. It answers a lot of questions. Accountability, openness, transparency, and it'll make things better for everyone.
We could not have done this without the sincere dedication of all of us working together, legislators and the co-ops.
What I have come to learn is that I believe this model, the cooperative model, is the best one that we possibly have. It's the one that's closest to the people. It's the one whose leadership is elected by the customers, and that's the way it should be. And now all we've done is take it a step further and made sure that those customers are going to have the information that they need, the transparency that they should have, to be able to utilize state agencies like ORS to be able to make sure that they're treated fairly. And that's all anybody at the end of the day wants to be treated is treated fairly. So very proud of it, very proud of everyone in this room. I look forward to its implementation, and I look forward to the cooperative system being strong for many, many years to come.
Brand new law.
Thank you.
I'm not going to go through the law with you, though I provided the handouts where you've got the whole law, and you've got a one-page summary that's a little bit more user-friendly that explains some of the changes, but basically it is about transparency. Member access to information, member access to the ballot box, returning the co-op to the members if they want. The information, by the way, is not just put out on it's in the law. That's got to be put on the website. Minutes, board meeting schedules and dates, things like that, but not for the whole public. This is a private company. It is for the members, and so it can be behind a members-only portal. So yes, but there's a handout for you if you're interested in that. So, was it an annual meeting gone wrong? Well, I don't think so. I think it's a really, really, really bigger issue than that. And we're not the only one, and it doesn't make us feel any better. You've still got to go through that if you have the problem. I don't recommend it. In the early 1940s, when my mother was working at the co-op, when I was going to come along a few years later, people were going to say that the co-op was a good thing. My parents never took me to co-op annual meeting. They weren't cheerleaders and stand on the table cheerleading for the co-op. That's the weird thing that I remember to this day. None of that. And yet I came away from growing up with them feeling that the co-op was a good thing. That's a pretty good place to start. All the advertising, all the good community relations, all the effort that we put in is not to get members to be standing on the table cheerleaders. They're not going to do that. But if you've got, it's thin, but we want it to be wide. If people will say, you know what do you think about that co-op? That's a pretty good thing. You don't want to lose that. Work hard so you don't lose that. So when you lose control of your message and other people take over, it's hard to get it back. Thank you.